Es domāju, ka arī šajā situācijā mums ir jābūt pieklājīgiem pret mūsu viesiem un jāizmanto angļu valoda kā šīs sesijas sarunu valoda. I think we should switch to the English because of the crowd here is 50-50 Latvians and not from Latvia, from Denmark. I have 15 questions written down here. I can start by myself and I can start actually with two huge ones, though maybe there is someone in the audience who would love to kick off this debate or discussion by your very own question. Okay, there are two questions in the back rows. Dāmas, lūdzu ar mikrofoniem. No jums pa labi. Jā, viena arī vajag skatos. Tur aizmugurē no tevis pa labi ir cilvēks, skaties uz rokām, jā, lūdzu.
Hello. I think the last...
Can you please stand up for us?
I think the last talk was interesting to me in that it proposes a solution which is more or less post-capitalist. Now, since the 2008 crash, I guess worldwide there has been a declining trust in a capitalist methodology. But this solution about the sharing economy to me is very interesting. The main question, I guess, is what is wrong with the capitalist economy? Why are shopping malls, for example, that have more or less replaced factories as collaborative spaces? Why do not shopping malls work in terms of a socialization of these
Don't
areas? That's the question.
Dean, can you?
Maybe
There's only one microphone, please share it. We are talking about sharing, so share it.
Yeah, we do have a lot of shopping malls replacing everything and factories demolished and actually in Tiangarax as well. And maybe that's the reason why we took this stand, because we believe that shopping malls, they totally don't improve the situation and they don't create any sort of social platform or community. People just come there to consume goods, not to know each other.
Does that not create some sort of socialization?
I mean, do you often say hello when you're buying milk to the one next to you? Buying milk? I don't think so.
I guess I don't say hello to the shopper because there's no reason. Is that the point?
Yes, that's exactly the point. So once you start to share something, it's some tools that it's great. The thing creates a space around it and the activity around it. Then it builds a whole sort of a social platform, and it becomes this new way of how we can be introduced to each other again.
I think I can also, at least for me, I think that there is a problem when big shopping malls becomes the replacement for example, other public spaces, because public spaces is something that we, in essence, run or take care of together by the municipality or state or something like this, but shopping malls are often owned by someone else. It's privately owned. It's based on the fact that you should consume, and they also set the rules for how you should behave, for example. And I think that can be problematic because if we sort of would transform everything into sort of shopping malls that were privately owned, then we would also, as citizens, wouldn't have so much influence in how we can behave there and what type of activities we can do there. And also because I just think it's unnecessary to consume that much, but that's just my personal opinion.
Okay, thank you. There was one more question, and Viestos, of course, the third one.
I don't know with what.
Please stand up.
Yeah. So
I repeat.
My name is Richard, and actually I'm an engineer, not more as an architect. So I had some questions. I don't know how to start because I had the line you had all that. So I think that I start with awkward with the Tiangarax. I think your is quite a good project. Is quite conceptual. And if you had a very good software for that computer system, you could get stabilize that, and it's a very good, nice project. I had the question and some comment about the project of Liva. Think the house of people under retirement is very good thing, and I want to ask, did she knew like to more entertain that kind of a project, she need and she must to had a priority of handicapped persons, because people under retirement usually are handicapped, many of them. So, and I pointed out of Deans, and Deans is a Danish person and is a Scandinavian. So the point of what I was thinking under the Dean's project is the conception of energy, the renewable energy, is on his roots is like the modern society already are working on a solar battery. So it's most of energy, renewable energy. It could be already the solar batteries, you know, and the energy could be renewable as a solar batteries. So that's it.
So the question is.
So that was my question. Maybe they had any comment the same, because it's not really a question, it's a rhetoric question probably. So that's it.
Okay, Dean, take it back.
Thanks for your questions. The discussion about the roof, I think it was the projects I present. I should also reiterate that they were students' projects from our group, so they're not my own. The project with the roof structure was a kind of exploration of, if one is going to the effort to set up scaffolding and move all the materials to actually insulate the roof, could one look at what other potential possibilities would be at the same time. The idea of wind was one proposal. Let's say that investigation was not, let's say, backed up with a lot of engineering or economic analysis over wind versus solar. So I can imagine also that solar could be a possibility on the roof. They also actually explored water collection that I didn't talk about as well. So these structures could be about collecting fresh water as well. So I think the suggestion you make is a valid one. It could be many possibilities that might be for further study. And I think that's very much the sense of, maybe I can also reiterate that the projects are not really hinted at as completely thought through solutions, but hopefully provocations, or let's say explorations that might start some kind of discussion over different possibilities that we could dream of or for. So I'll pass the response to the other questions over.
Okay, there will be answering, or we can move to Viestus. Telmanch had an answer, then we have two and more questions here.
Yeah. Thanks to panel for the interesting presentations, really exciting stuff. I had one particular question coming from anthropologist myself. Quite a bit, I think, of the issues that lie behind empty housing, suburbanization, and lack of cooperation in microareas are social. Would you agree? If that's the case, it strikes me that the solutions proposed, or provocations as Dean just put it, the provocations come from the spectrum of architecture and design. Would you not think that if the logic behind these issues is social, we should engage with the social dynamics and social mechanisms and delay the architecture and design to a later stage? Even though we are at the stage of provocation, and this is obviously not, you're not Department of Housing, yet the issues that are being proposed, I think, are very valid. All I'm asking is that all of your research did begin with exploration of economy, society, and politics. Yet once you move to the solutions, they basically become very, typically architectural. Thank you.
Can I take it from the point of view of my project? I totally agree with you, and I do believe that the roots are always social, because what else are the roots? But then, of course, it's also an architecture school, but if we look at, for example, the kind of notion of the different demonstrations, how can an architectural project become also an event, or have a double function. For example, if you make a building that is a pilot project and it engages with the society to learn about the different possibilities or demonstrate them, I think it becomes a little bit social. Also, the notion of the inability to share things with others because of the kind of history that the sharing economy has been in Latvia, gradually implementing that in the architecture and not like force anyone into your solutions also could be a social aspect of designing. Also, to reflect on the previous question about accessibility, could it also, maybe that's a question to you, could it also be a social design to make a decision of not making ramps everywhere, and actually respect the person and not put him in a position of vulnerability, and kind of say that I believe that you're able to climb the stair, maybe with a little bit of support and of kind of not make everything extremely hospitalized, which creates an environment that makes you age faster. When you have these small obstacles, for example, my grandparents live in a house that they run by themselves and they're almost 80 and they climb stairs every day. I think if they lived in a sterile environment where everything was flat and they just had their bed automatically move for themselves, it's kind of a different environment to age in. And maybe that decision is also social, is it?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think the issue is a very important one about the relationship between the spatial and the social. And I think it's something in the kind of group we're involved in that's very important, is to try to, let's say, not try to deal with one without considering the other. Maybe there was sort of, let's say, work to try to understand better the situation of the residents that was spoken to, and question about how their everyday life is, what their challenges are, how they see their life in these microregion communities, which we didn't really talk about. There was some of that, although we would have liked to have done more of that. I think when you ask the question, are all of the problems not social? For me, I think it's more complex than that. I don't see them only as social problems, but of course we can see the social layer to that. When you talk about the idea of the kind of the unwillingness or sort of suspicion about collective organization, I think that there are many layers onto that. And I think what we're trying to do in the studio is also, let's say, not try to be present ourselves and present the work as that of kind of amateur anthropologists, or kind of present light or low quality anthropology, but to in some way try to ask what could the spatial response to these complex issues be. And I think in doing that, these spatial responses are not only about bricks or windows, but also are about asking questions about organization, about new forms of institutions, different forms of relationship in terms of use, goods, sharing, and so forth, which I think came out in both projects that were just presented. So I hope that in a way they're not only seen as the architects trying to deal with a social problem through architecture, but rather trying to work with the complexity of that the architecture could provoke questions around what other forms of social organization could be possible. Let's say that they might provoke a discussion. So, but I very much take your point around this relation between social and spatial. So thank you for that question.
Well, I'm journalist Igor Vatolin, and I have a very practical question on implementation of your brilliant ideas. Do you have in mind some agents of change, of implementation of your ideas, or it's a kind of academic exercise in a real landscape, but still a kind of homework and, well, just brainstorm? But what about real implementation, and are you going to work further here in Riga in order to have and to see your ideas realized? Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe I take it with my project. It came out of inspiration that was very realistic and embedded in the society as a movement, Occupy Me. And then I further worked with the organization called Free Riga, which also kind of helped me to understand the situation of organizations that try to be change makers in Riga. And I quickly realized how very culturally oriented these organizations are, and I found the problem much larger and much more much more serious in a way. But I could say serious because I wanted to take it to a municipal and state level, where I realized it's not only the change makers, the little organizations that can make a bigger difference. That there is a pool of inhabitants and a pool of empty buildings, and that has to be paired. And then at this point, it became a little bit unrealistic because it has to happen in the long term, and it has to be planned accordingly way ahead. Although in a very cultural level, these spaces are already taken over by Free Riga and other institutions, and we are still working together, and I think we're going to try to develop more and more residential areas, but it has a completely different framework than different kind of galleries or offices. So at some point you're very realistic until you won't actually reside in the empty building. Then it's a completely different story, and I think I'm very excited to see how Free Riga and other organizations take it over that border and find a framework how to deal with the owners of the empty buildings to actually make those residential areas. So I think it's kind of partially realistic.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think Free Riga is a very good example, because when it's a really long process. I mean, we were talking with owners of this factory, and it changed its owners actually many times, and now it belongs to the bank because our owners, they renovated part and went bankrupt. So now bank actually doesn't really know what to do with it. So our idea was actually to maybe talk directly to them as our business model.
Yes, and this scenario, for example, in our project would be completely unrealistic in Copenhagen, for example, because of the land value or the land prices. Whereas here it's a different scenario where we see the potential because it's not seen as a valuable land there, and it's quite cheap, and it's been for sale for a really long time. But the projects are quite open-ended, and it could take different forms. We had a part which was storage, which could, for example, be a private entrepreneur, and it could be in cooperation with many different, so it's not 100% solved, but we do allow ourselves to be quite visionary. Like, we have very realistic and very sort of factual research, and then we allow ourselves to be very visionary in order to get somewhere. So we see it more as not having an unfinished project, more as provoking and inspiring, and then inspire you so much that you would like to discuss it further, if you understand what I mean.
I think it's also a great question, because also in our sort of educational framework, we're really interested in, let's say, not thinking this only as an academic exercise or homework at all. So I think your question is a very good one. What we try to do in a way is to engage with very real situations and try to, let's say, absorb all of the complexity and opportunity, and kind of try to find a way, let's say, to continue engagement in these areas. And I think that obviously what is presented today is not with full implementation plans that are entirely realistic or thought through, but there are some ambitions around areas to start, or places to start to, address, and also stakeholders and actors to start to engage. So the model very much that we're interested in is not only the architect in an academic context being given a design education, but very much being trying to train a kind of cliche would be a change agents, or let's say those who would be very interested to engage in those areas. And I think we're quite lucky in our studio to have, for example, Liva and Tamara, who are local Regans, who we hope who are in the process of Liva's of turning down lots of great job offers in Denmark and different places to actually try to do things here. So I think that's a very exciting possibility that could be a way. And I imagine also with Tamara and Louise's project that there might be, we hope, some kind of life with those things. But obviously, in the context of these studios, we come in for a short time. We, of course, go on with another theme next semester and the following semester. But we try to somehow keep prodding and engaging. And we're very, very interested to do that here in Riga, and would be delighted to try to. What's so exciting for me about this conference is all of the speakers and those also locals here today who are activists, who are planners, city architects, and so forth, who are all in a room discussing these challenges. And I think that it starts here. I mean, of course, it's already started here, but when you ask the question, where do these things get implemented, or where do these challenges get embraced, I think it's clearly through the leadership of the municipality and others who are trying to push where to go forward. And I think that's extremely exciting as a moment for everyone in this room to have a voice on. So we're very interested to keep talking or trying to come up with ideas that might have a life off the drawing board.
Thank you very much.
Hello. I have some question related to Podvicians on the way what is missing, that it's going forward or unhappening. So I come from France, and in France, in social housing unit, usually they are institutions who bring law and order and hold them stable and lively and so on. And I want to understand in Podvicians and in the case of Riga, in Latvia in global way, is there in the law, there's laws that say in a building, if it's more than 10 apartments who belong to 10 different owners, do they have to get an association of owner or syndicate of owner who has to manage the state of the building? Because we spoke about the safety issue actually in provisions, and if you don't have a legal frame to make it work, I don't see how you can find the money to realize this good idea what we saw today. And the second question for Dr. Dean is in terms of communication with citizens, as we saw this morning, do you have the idea or will with the Danish Institute to bring your exhibition in a pavilion in middle of Provisium to expose all this idea we saw this morning, this afternoon and so on?
We would love to have the exhibition travel to Persians. We haven't discussed it yet, but of course it would be a logical thing to move it there, and it would be fantastic to hear the responses and feedback from residents and also other stakeholders. So absolutely, that would be really, really productive, I think. The first question about the fragmented ownership problem. This for us was always kind of ambiguous, and I'm not, let's say, the expert on it, but what struck us was the contrast between the Estonian condition and the Latvian condition, where the associations were working quite well in the Estonian context, but we understood that there are associations in this context, but let's say there's less involvement in them. Regarding the legal requirement for them or not, in this context, I'm not actually 100% sure. All I understood, and maybe you guys can speak more to it, or I'm sure others in the room here know much more than I do about it, but that there was, let's say that this, as you say, is a kind of stumbling block. But obviously when a roof is leaking, that is affecting more than the rooftop apartments. Obviously there are, let's say, renovations taking place through association activity. So I'll stop there because I'm out of my depth on that.
And we are out of time as well. Actually, I have one last question I would love to have a very, very short answer. Dean, you mentioned the concept of prefabrication. Actually, the kind of the focus, the narrative you are focusing is the prefabricated spatial entity as a housing unit. What do you think? What else has been prefabricated through the virtue of these prefabricated spatial entities? And how did you engage with these other prefabrications within those projects? Because you showed us very, very powerful imagery. But I would love to, as Vēstures, I would love to see actually what's beneath them.
That's a difficult question. I think our interest in approaching, as a group of teachers who were trying to discuss what themes we wanted to work on next, our interest in that whole discussion is the stigmatization in a Northern European context of prefabricated areas. So we were interested in, let's say, moving beyond understanding these as the cause of social problems, to as the singular cause of social problems, to understand also the qualities and potential in this kind of construction. I guess what you're hinting at is not only the idea of the kind of building system, but also the idea of a kind of prefabricated society or prefabricated families, which, of course, what we have seen and we had somehow a hunch that we would see that in both contexts is, of course, an extraordinary diversity of use of these spaces, extraordinary transformation of them, a kind of rich kind of palette of different kind of strange, outcomes that for us I think were very inspiring. So I don't think it's as simple to say that these are, let's say, sick buildings that are producing sick and conformist societies, but that actually they offer a huge potential. And from our perspective in the discussions, when one looks at the scale of this building mass, this is not something to be demolished because there are extraordinary rich social networks and communities in place. But are things that should be strengthened through also kind of looking at different possibilities for using the kind of energy and kind of simple engineering logics of needing to somehow stop these buildings, degrading and falling down, to use these as excuses to launch new possibilities for social spaces, new kinds of programming, better fits between residents and their own needs and desires. So in a way I see this discussion now as a kind of moment of huge opportunity if one looks beyond the kind of functionalist problem-solving logic and asks questions, what could we get out of this moment when we face the kind of extraordinary building stock that something needs to be done about it.
Cool, thank you very much. And on that bombshell, yes, thank you.